Good afternoon, Kix.
Hey, George, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm sure the sight of that snow this morning was a little nerve-wracking. But let's talk about the weather a little later and
yes, it was.
talk about your trip that you're on and what inspired you to jump on a dirt bike and travel across the country.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely the weather freaked me out a little bit. Snow and motorbikes don't go hand in hand, but the goal of the year was to drive every possible province and territory you could drive in Canada on my dirt bike. And I wanted to make sure I went from ocean to ocean. And I started off back in March. I rode out to 𝗂𝗓𝗂𝘁 on the very west coast, and then turned around, went to Yellowknife, and then from there headed up to Newfoundland. And the last stop on the list, actually, it doesn't make sense on the map that much, but was the Yukon territory. And so the plan was snow melt to snowfall, but I hit several snowstorms on the way out, and it snowed today, so I'm probably going to get a little snow on the way home.
I have a motorbike. I love adventure. I've never done one like that or even close to it, but what made you want to just get out there on the bike and see this beautiful country?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely a beautiful country. I had originally done, well, maybe not originally, but one of the trips I'd done in the past was I rode a different motorbike from Canada down to Argentina. And I got to travel through every country in the Americas, essentially, except for Venezuela, which was having some issues at the moment, but they're resolving a little of them now. Anyway, I learned a lot about the cultures and cuisines and different countries and different foods and stuff along the way. And I got to learn about the Inca culture, and I got to try guinea pig in Peru, and I got to be part of some asados in Argentina and all kinds of amazing stuff. And people asked me lots about the trip and lots of places in the world, and I had plenty to say. And then a lot of people said, well, you're from Canada, let's talk about Canada. And it dawned on me that I really didn't know a lot about my own country. And the more Canadians I talked to, I found they don't know a ton about their own country either, and the culture and the different foods that are inside of it. And so I thought, well, if I did it on a dirt bike or motorbike one way, I should try and do it on another motorbike the other way, and chose a somewhat impractical size bike, a Honda 250, just because I wanted to prove as well that not only could you see the country on a bike, but you could do on something small and a little bit impractical, and it didn't have to cost you a fortune. You could just get out there and ride.
Wow, a Honda 250.
Yeah, Honda 250.
It can get windy in the north. Have you been getting blown over? Not over, obviously, you're still here, but what's that been like on such a tinier bike and traveling some pretty rougher roads, and it does get windy.
Yeah, no, I definitely, and I basically, the answer you just gave me is the one I love to get from people. Is they're usually like, wait a minute, what? You're riding this bike? And then they'll look at the license plate, and I'll be in Newfoundland or Nova Scotia, and they'll be like, so would you just fly the bike here? I'm like, no. I rode. I'm like, you rode the bike here? And sometimes my wife is with me. She'll hop on the back, and then people are like, wait, the two of you came on this bike? I'm like, well, not for all of it, but for some of it. And so it's been great in terms of the wind and stuff like that. For sure, you get blown around on a small bike quite easily, and that kind of thing. But the upside is you can also go anywhere you want on a dirt bike. You can rip up in the countryside and go over the mountains and camp in the bush. And if someone says, hey, I want to take you down this trail and take you cranberry bush hunting or something like that, I'm like, yeah, let's go. I can follow you. No problem at all. So there's been a few drawbacks in terms of wind, speed. We don't go much faster than 100. And I can't carry a lot of luggage, but that's fine. You don't need a lot to travel the country with.
But how do you prepare for this luggage-wise? And what's your gear look like when you're setting out on unpredictable weather conditions, a new area that you haven't been to before? How do you prepare for that?
Yeah, for sure. So because it's a bit of a food-inspired adventure, one of the things I do is I have a little 1-quart pot that hangs off the back of the motorbike to make sure I can cook anywhere I land. And I have this little burn anything stove, so it can burn diesel or gas or whatever you want to burn in it. And then I have a little spice rack on the back that you open, unzip this thing, there's spices in there. But other than that, there's one bag that is strictly full of camping gear, tent and a sleeping bag and that kind of thing. And then another small bag on the other side. And it's got just clothes in it, 1 pair of pants, 4 underwear, 4 socks, 4 shirts, and that's a wrap.
Wow.
And then on the back, in the box in the back is basically like my work on wheels. So it's full of cameras and camera gear, that kind of thing. So I can video it and tape things, interview people and take pictures and get their story and document the food, that kind of thing.
So when you're talking to your buddies and they're like, what's it like? What have been some of the highlights that'll stick with you?
Oh my goodness. There's so many highlights. It's such a great country. You could drive an hour and the culture changes. The people change, the attitude changes, the food changes. But there's definitely been some highlights. I'd say one of the things was I landed on a cod fishing boat in Newfoundland with this guy. And so we get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and we head out on the ocean. And I'm picturing fishing like I do in Alberta, where you spend the day fishing, but in 15 minutes we basically caught our limit. And we're just hauling in cod over the side of the boat with a hand rope. Like we have this rope and a couple of jigs on it. We're hauling over the side. Go back to the house behind his place, overlooking the ocean. You got the fish, and then he's going to teach me how to make cod tongue and britches, is what they call it. And so they cut the tongue out of the cod, which is a very small piece, and try to have about 15 or 20 of those to make the meal. And then the britches, which is essentially the female egg sac inside of the fish. Sometimes there's eggs in it, sometimes there's not. The first time I had it, I had about 3 of them or 4 of them, and there was no eggs in there, and it wasn't that bad. We went back to his house, he fried them up, and it wasn't that bad. And then the second time I had it, my wife was with me, and I'm like, oh, we're going to have this cod tongue and britches. And this one was quite a bit bigger and was full of eggs, and I wasn't expecting the same result. And if you get a mouthful of like basically cooked caviar, the texture throws you off a little bit. So that was a little bit much to wrap my mind around, but the taste overall wasn't bad, and the adventure itself was great.
So you mentioned your wife, and she's not on the back of the 250.
So she showed up 3 times on this trip. Luckily, she's quite little. She's not too big. Well, she's actually, I shouldn't say that. According to her, she's average size.
Okay.
Yeah, average height. but if you look at her, she's a smaller lady, and so she fits in the back like just about right. I wouldn't say it's comfortable, and she definitely doesn't love it, but she'll roll her eyes, and she's up for an adventure. And so she'll hop on the bike, and she did 2.5 weeks in Quebec with me, and then she did about 2.5 weeks around the Maritime provinces, and a little bit around Alberta kind of thing. And so she'll come in for a bit of the adventure, and she'll basically tolerate it just because she likes to travel, but it's not her ideal way.
And she supports, obviously, what you're doing. That's pretty epic, because you've been on the road for a long time.
Yeah, in 6 months, I try to make sure that somehow we cross paths at least once a month. So I try to make sure she could fly out and do this with me like at least once a month as we went along. And I flew back once for a wedding, and then as I was going back through BC and then back from Saskatchewan to Yukon, and I caught her again. So not like the most ideal way to maintain a long-term relationship, but she's quite supportive. She knows me well, and she's okay with it. So
what surprised you about the Yukon? Because I find I'm from Victoria originally, but I've lived up here for a couple decades, and this is a place where a lot of people don't know much about it. And then they come here and they're kind of blown away. It surprises them. But for you, what did you know, and what surprised you?
Oh, the Yukon is like it's one of the hidden gems of Canada for sure. It's kind of unique in its positioning in the country that's not really on the way to anywhere unless you're maybe going to Alaska or that kind of thing. And so you have to kind of want to go here. I didn't realize it was so basically vast and unpopulated. There's hardly anybody here, but the scenery is unbelievable, and the people are amazing. Mm-hmm. I came through in fall, and everyone's like, oh, it's going to be snowy already, and there's going to be no leaves. And I think I timed it amazingly because there was nothing but orange, red, and yellow the whole way here. And I saw bears, and I saw elk, and I saw some moose, and I saw deer and coyotes and all kinds of stuff. So the scenery was amazing. And then the people and the food, like next level. Mm-hmm. I'd spent the day in Carcross a couple of days ago with a lady and her husband, Crystal Weeb, and her husband, Tom. And they invited me out. They're going to teach me about moose stew and bannock. She's First Nations. And it was amazing. We started with the moose stew and bannock, and then we started smoking trout from the 𝗔𝗍 Lake close by, and they had some salmon that we smoked. And then she took me out picking high bush cranberries and rose hips to make a First Nations medicine. And then later in the afternoon, she fried up some trout, and she made it with craft dinner, which I thought was a bit funny because everything else had been harvested from the wild. And I'm like, well, craft dinner, what are you talking about? And she put tomatoes in it, and she's like, if you're looking for authentic, my grandma made this dish for me once a week as a kid, and this is what we eat sometimes. And I'm like, oh, man, that's so funny, because everything else was hunted or harvested. It was great.
So how do you go about meeting people? Like, do you send emails, or like, what's your process for like knowing that you're going to find these good stories and this great food?
That is an excellent question, because it's one most people don't think about. And that is for sure, if fuel and weather weren't one of the challenges, trying to find people to invite you into their house who don't know you and say, hey, you want to cook me lunch? It's a big ask. And every province and territory has been 100%. And so I'll try to like put out a hello to my group of people and say, does anyone know anyone in this province? And sometimes that'll yield one person or a suggestion for a type of food, that kind of thing. And then as soon as someone gives me a suggestion, I'll start asking around in that community, whether I'll email like the local tourist information board or maybe like a local Facebook group. And then I'll start just like asking questions. And eventually someone gives in and says, actually, my aunt is a really good cook, and she happens to make the clam chowder, or she happens to know how to go quail hogging, or she happens to cook let's say like caribou or muskrat in her teepee kind of thing, or whatever the case was, which are all dishes I've eaten on this trip. Mm. And so as soon as I find someone, I basically don't give up. I just keep asking and asking and asking. And someone always says, for sure, come to my house. We'll invite you over, just like Crystal did the other day. And sometimes I spend the night, sometimes I spend the afternoon. But it always ends in like a family dinner of some kind, an education about the local history, culture, and the food. And basically we part ways being friends. To be Canadian is like nothing else in the world. It's the people are so friendly, so open. It's amazing.
I'm sure many people are listening. I want to do that. I'm going to take my bike. I told you we could travel across the country on it. So when is your book detailing your adventure coming out?
Yeah, for sure. So the plan was to write a book about it all. I wanted to include everyone's sort of story as I went, and then put the recipe in it. So it would be a collection of the stories of people across Canada, and then the recipe they provided. And I wrote a book before, and it took a lot longer than I thought it would. It took me about 2 years to punch that out. But now that I know the process, I'm hoping to have this done in about a year from now. I'm going to go home. I'm going to hibernate for the winter. I'm going to take some time off because it's been a busy summer, and I'm just going to write and make videos. And it should be ready in about a year. So everyone that I met along the way, I'm just going to email them a copy. And the last book I wrote was a bestseller, so hopefully this one will be too. And it's a lot of work, but in the end, it's worth it. And people are really nice to me, so I want to put them in the best light possible.
What an adventure. I'm jealous, and appreciate you stopping into the studio to talk about it today.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, for sure. If anyone has any suggestions or wants to ask me any questions or check out my other book, they can just basically Google my name. It's Kix Marshall or 𝗂𝗏𝗂.com. And I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to hear what kind of food stories you want to share.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, George.
That's Canadian author and adventurer Kix Marshall, K-I-X. He's currently riding across Canada on his dirt bike. You can learn more about him and his writing at 𝗂𝗏𝗂.com.